All right, shalom, shalom, shalom. Welcome once again to another video review with your Akazaki Yahoo. As always, I'm giving all praises, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahweh Bashem Hamashiach, Wamalak Yahweh Shai, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say shalom, wa baruki. That is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait to the day when the Most High brings us back together and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation under the Most High power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone. And our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. All praises to the Almighty Yah. Hallelujah.
So be it. Hallelujah.
Yes, indeed. As always, I'm joined by my most esteemed Akinanaya. Shalom, Aki.
Hey, shalom, shalom, my king. Shalom, shalom, Yasharal. Yahweh Ba'Shem, Yahweh Shah Barakatah.
Yes, indeed. The Most High Yahweh, in the name of his beloved Son, Yahweh Shai, the Messiah, bless you. All right, so we are in the second month on the Gregorian calendar. So we're going to do some Black history for you all. And we were able to find a brother who you probably haven't heard of by the name of Robert Smalls. The name of this video is They Underestimated Robert Smalls. His silent betrayal changed the Civil War. Now, the name of this channel that it's coming from is Robert Small, the Untold Commander. So I'm not sure about where that came from, but we're gonna get to it and get through it and enjoy. So here we go.
Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, May 13th, 1862. 3 o'clock in the morning. The Confederate military transport planter sat docked at Southern Wharf, silent, dark, steam engine cold. 3 white officers had gone ashore hours earlier. Standard procedure. They did this every night. They always came back at dawn. Nobody questioned it. The crew left behind was enslaved, black men who worked the ship, loaded cargo, followed orders, men the Confederacy assumed had nowhere to go. That assumption was about to cost them a war. Robert Smalls stood on the deck in the darkness, 23 years old, calm, focused. He had been planning this moment for months, maybe years. The Confederacy had made him a pilot, taught him to navigate their war zone, showed him every signal, every checkpoint, every safe route through the most heavily defended harbor in the South. They handed him the keys to their entire operation, and they assumed he would never use them. Tonight, they would learn how wrong they were. This is not a story about escape. This is a story about what happens when a system stops paying attention, when confidence becomes carelessness, when the people you underestimate are the ones steering your ships. The Confederacy looked at Robert Smalls and saw a slave, reliable, obedient, invisible. What they did not see was a man who had been memorizing their mistakes, learning their routines, waiting for the exact right moment. And that moment had just arrived. The planter was not some fishing vessel. This was a military transport, a side-wheel steamer, 147 feet long, armed with cannons, used to move Confederate troops and ammunition throughout Charleston Harbor. When this ship sailed, forts let it pass. Guards waved it through, no inspections, no questions, because the planter was authorized, official, part of the system. Robert Smalls understood something the Confederacy did not. The most dangerous weapon in war is not firepower. It is trust. And the Confederacy trusted him completely. Robert Smalls had been working on ships in Charleston Harbor since before the war started. He knew these waters, every channel, every sandbar, every current. When the Confederacy seized civilian vessels and converted them for military use, they needed experienced pilots. Men who could navigate at night, in fog, under pressure. Robert Smalls had all those skills, so the Confederate military put him at the helm of the planter, gave him access to their entire communication system, taught him every recognition signal, every password, every procedure for passing through Confederate checkpoints. They assumed that because he was enslaved, he would never think to use that knowledge against them. That assumption was their first mistake. For 3 years, Robert Smalls piloted the planter through Charleston Harbor. He transported troops to Fort Sumter. He moved ammunition to artillery batteries. He delivered orders between Confederate command posts. And every single time, he was watching, learning. The white officers never noticed. They saw a black man doing his job. What they did not see was an intelligence operative in plain sight. Robert Smalls observed how the officers behaved at checkpoints, how they stood, how they spoke, what signals they gave. He noticed that Captain Charles Relia always wore the same straw hat, always folded his arms the same way on deck, always gave the same whistle signals when approaching forts. Small details, routine behaviors, the kind of things people do without thinking. Robert Smalls was thinking about all of it. He also noticed something else. Every night the 3 white officers left the ship. They went home to sleep. They left the enslaved crew alone on board, unsupervised, unguarded. The Confederacy never considered this a security risk. Why would they? Enslaved men had no authority, no training, no ability to operate a military vessel. Except Robert Smalls had all of those things. The Confederacy had given them to him. They just did not realize what he could do with them. That was their second mistake. Robert Smalls had a family, a wife named Hannah, a daughter named Elizabeth, an infant son named Robert Jr. They were enslaved by different people, living in different places. Robert had tried to buy their freedom. He saved money. He made an offer, $800 for his wife and children. The enslaver agreed to the price, but Robert only had $100. It would take years to save the rest. Years in which his family could be sold, separated, destroyed. Robert Smalls understood that the system would never let him win by following the rules. If he wanted his family to stay together, he would have to break every rule the Confederacy had, and he would have to do it perfectly, because there would be no second chance. In late April or early May of 1862, Robert Smalls called a secret meeting with the other enslaved crewmen on the planter. There were 7 of them in total. He needed all of them, if even one refused. If anyone informed the Confederate authorities, everyone would die. Talking about escape was a capital offense. Planning it was treason. Executing it meant execution if caught. But Robert Smalls laid out the plan anyway. The white officers left every night. That window between darkness and dawn was the only opportunity. If they moved fast, if they moved quietly, if they did everything exactly right, they could take the ship, all of it, the vessel, the weapons, the cargo, and sail it straight to the Union blockade. Every man at that meeting understood what was being asked. This was not a guaranteed plan. This was not a safe plan. But it was the only plan. And every single one of them agreed. But Robert Smalls was not leaving his family behind. His wife, his children, the families of the other crewmen. If they escaped and left everyone in Charleston, the Confederacy would retaliate, torture the families, sell them, use them as hostages. The only way this worked was if everyone left together. That meant women, children, an infant, on a stolen military ship, in the middle of a war zone, at night. The difficulty had just multiplied. But Robert Smalls had made his decision. They were all leaving, or none of them were. May 12, 1862, evening. The planter docked at Southern Wharf as usual. The 3 white officers prepared to go ashore. Before they left, Robert Smalls asked Captain Relia if the crew's families could visit the ship. This was occasionally allowed. Relia said yes. He told them everyone had to leave before curfew. Robert Smalls agreed. The officers walked off the ship. They went home. They went to sleep. They had no idea they would never see the planter again. The families arrived after dark. They came quietly. No noise. No attention. They boarded the ship as if visiting. Then they stayed, hidden below deck. The crewmen pretended to escort them off, then returned to the ship. To anyone watching from shore, it looked like a normal evening. Families visited. Families left. The crew remained on board. Everything appeared routine. But below deck, women and children sat in complete silence. Waiting. One sound, one cry from the infant. One noise that attracted attention from the nearby guard posts, and the entire operation would collapse before it started. Hours passed. Midnight came. Then 1 o'clock, then 2. The city of Charleston slept. The harbor was quiet. Confederate soldiers manned the forts, but nobody was expecting trouble. Not from a ship docked at their own wharf. Not from a crew of enslaved men who had nowhere to go. The Confederacy's confidence had created a blind spot, and Robert Smalls was about to sail a warship through it. 3 o'clock in the morning, Robert Smalls gave the order. The firemen raised steam, the engine began to rumble. Smoke started rising from the stack. In a city on military alert, this should have been suspicious. It was not, because the planter was an authorized Confederate vessel. Nobody questioned authorized vessels. Robert Smalls walked to the captain's cabin. He put on one of Captain Relia's jackets. He took the straw hat and placed it on his head. Then he stepped out onto the deck and stood exactly where the captain always stood, arms folded across his chest, posture straight, face forward. In the darkness, from a distance, he looked enough like a white officer to pass. That was all he needed. He did not need to fool anyone up close. He just needed to fool them long enough to get out of range. The planter's engines came to full power. The side wheels began to turn, and at approximately 3:15 in the morning, Robert Smalls gave the order to cast off. The ship pulled away from Southern Wharf. Slowly, calmly. No rushing, no panic. Just a Confederate military transport moving through Charleston Harbor on what appeared to be official business. Except the man at the helm was not the captain. He was the man the Confederacy had underestimated, and he was taking everything. The first test came immediately. The planter had to pass directly in front of General Roswell Ripley's headquarters, the Confederate commander of Charleston. His office overlooked the harbor. Guards were stationed outside. If anyone looked closely, if anyone noticed something wrong, if they sent a signal to stop the ship, it was over. Robert Smalls did not slow down. He blew the ship's steam whistle, 3 short blasts, the standard departure signal. Then he sailed past Confederate headquarters as if he had every right to be there. Nobody stopped him. Nobody questioned him. Nobody raised an alarm. Because in the logic of the Confederate military, this was impossible. An enslaved man stealing a warship in the middle of the night. It simply could not happen. So they did not see it happening. The planter continued toward Atlantic Wharf. This was where the families of the other crewmen were waiting. The ship pulled alongside the dock. Women and children climbed aboard quickly, silently, moving through shadows. Then the planter pulled away. Now there were 16 people on board. 8 enslaved men, 3 women, 5 children, 1 infant. All of them were fugitives. All of them would be executed if caught. And they still had to pass 5 armed Confederate forts before reaching the Union blockade 7 miles away. The operation had barely started. Fort Johnson appeared ahead. Stone walls, artillery batteries, cannons aimed at the water, Confederate soldiers on watch. The planter approached. Robert Smalls stood on deck wearing the captain's hat, arms folded, posture perfect. Exactly the way Captain Relia always stood. He blew the steam whistle. 3 short blasts, the recognition signal. Fort Johnson's guards saw the planter, saw the Confederate flags flying, saw what looked like a white officer on deck, and they let the ship pass. No challenge, no inspection. 1 fort down, 4 more to go. Castle Pinckney came next. Another fort, more guns, same result. Robert Smalls gave the correct signal. The guards recognized the planter as an authorized vessel, waved it through. Then Fort Ripley, then Fort Sumter, the largest fortification in Charleston Harbor, the place where the Civil War had started, the symbol of Confederate military power. And Robert Smalls was about to sail right past it. The planter approached Fort Sumter at approximately 4:15 in the morning. Still dark, still quiet. Still looking like routine military movement. Robert Smalls blew the whistle, 1 long blast, 2 short, the exact signal the planter used every single day. Guards on the fort's walls saw the ship, recognized it, and did nothing. The planter glided past Fort Sumter without a shot being fired. At that moment, Robert Smalls crossed an invisible line. He was now beyond the range of Confederate guns. If the alarm was raised, the forts could not stop him. But he was not safe. Not yet. The Union blockade was still 7 miles offshore. And if Union forces thought the planter was attacking, they would sink it before anyone could explain. Robert Smalls had planned for this. Hidden below deck was a white bedsheet. As soon as the planter cleared the last Confederate fort, Robert Smalls ordered the Confederate flags taken down. He ordered the bedsheet raised. A white flag, a surrender signal. The planter increased speed and headed straight for the Union fleet. On board the USS Onward, a Union warship, sailors spotted an approaching vessel, moving fast, coming from Confederate territory, but flying a white flag. It could be a trick, a ruse, a Confederate trap. The Onward's crew went to battle stations. Cannons were loaded. Orders were given to prepare to fire. Then one of the officers noticed something. There were people on the planter's deck. Black people, women, children, and a man waving the white sheet like his life depended on it. The USS Onward held fire. As the planter pulled alongside, Robert Smalls removed the captain's hat. He called out in a loud, clear voice, "Good morning, sir. I have brought you some of the old United States guns, sir." The Union sailors stood frozen. They were looking at a Confederate military transport, commanded by a black man, filled with families, in the middle of a war zone. It took several seconds for anyone to process what they were seeing. Then the realization hit. These people had just stolen a Confederate warship, right out of Charleston Harbor, under the nose of every fort in the city, without firing a single shot. Robert Smalls and the 15 others were brought aboard the USS Onward. They were safe. They were behind Union lines. They were free. But the operation was not over. Not yet. Because what Robert Smalls had just done went far beyond escape. He had delivered something the Union Navy desperately needed: intelligence. For 3 years, Robert Smalls had piloted the planter throughout Charleston Harbor. He knew where every Confederate fort was positioned. He knew which batteries had ammunition. He knew which waterways were mined. He knew which channels were safe for Union ships. And most importantly, he had the planter's logbook, a complete record of Confederate military movements, supply routes, communication codes, everything. The Union had been trying to penetrate Charleston's defenses for over a year. They had no maps, no intelligence, no way to know where their ships could safely move. And Robert Smalls had just handed them the entire blueprint, for free. The Union officers could barely process what they were hearing. This was not some desperate refugee with limited information. This was a trained Confederate pilot with years of operational knowledge. Rear Admiral Samuel Francis DuPont, commander of the Union's South Atlantic Blockading Squadron, interviewed Robert Smalls personally. DuPont was a career military officer. He had evaluated intelligence sources before, but Robert Smalls was different. Days later, DuPont would write in an official report to Washington that Robert Smalls was superior to any intelligence source who had come into Union lines. Those were his exact words. A Union admiral had just confirmed that an enslaved man was the best operative he had ever encountered, but that confirmation would come later. Right now, the Union Navy had a more immediate question. What do we do with this ship? The planter was not just a prize. It was a fully armed Confederate military transport. Intact, operational, filled with weapons and ammunition. The ship itself was worth thousands of dollars. The cannons were worth more. The intelligence was priceless. Robert Smalls had not just escaped. He had delivered a complete military package to the enemy. And he had done it without the Confederacy firing a single shot. The Union Navy immediately saw the value. They kept the planter. They kept the weapons. And they kept Robert Smalls. Not as a refugee, as an asset. Robert Smalls did not stop at providing information. He told Union commanders he could pilot their ships through Charleston Harbor. He knew every route, every signal, every checkpoint password. The Union took him up on the offer immediately. Within days, Robert Smalls was leading Union naval operations in the same waters he had just escaped from. He knew where Confederate forces were weakest. He knew which islands could be taken without resistance. He knew how to move through mined channels. And 1 week after his escape, Union forces used Robert Smalls's intelligence to capture Coles Island. An entire Confederate artillery battery, taken without a fight. The Confederates never saw it coming. They were outmaneuvered because the man they had underestimated had given their enemies perfect operational knowledge. The Union held Coles Island for the rest of the war. It became a forward base, a launching point for further operations. All because Robert Smalls had known exactly where to strike. But the impact went beyond tactics. Robert Smalls traveled to Washington. He met with President Abraham Lincoln. He met with Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. This was not a symbolic meeting, this was strategy. At that point in the war, Union policy still prohibited black men from serving as combat soldiers. The North was fighting a war against slavery, but would not let black men fight for their own freedom. Robert Smalls stood in front of Lincoln and made a case. If a black man could steal a Confederate warship and navigate it through a war zone, black men could serve in the Union Army. The logic was undeniable. Shortly after that meeting, Secretary of War Stanton issued an order. 5,000 black soldiers would be authorized for enlistment. The timing was not coincidental. Robert Smalls had just changed military policy by proving what was possible. One ship, one night, one operation, and the entire structure of the Union Army shifted. Back in Charleston, the Confederacy was waking up to disaster. Sunrise came. The planter was gone. At first, nobody understood what had happened. Confederate officers arrived at the dock expecting to see their ship. It was not there. They asked the guards. The guards said the planter had left during the night. On whose authority? Nobody knew. Where did it go? Nobody knew. The officers checked the logs. Nothing. No orders. No authorization. No explanation. Then someone noticed. The enslaved crew had not returned. The families who had visited the night before had not left, and Captain Relia's spare uniform was missing from his cabin. That was when the realization hit. The ship had not been moved by Confederate orders. It had been stolen. By the crew. The enslaved crew. The people the Confederacy had trusted to operate a military vessel in the middle of a war had just taken that vessel and everything on it directly to the enemy. Panic spread through Confederate command. General Roswell Ripley sent immediate dispatches. Lock down the harbor. Search every ship. Find out who authorized this. But it was too late. The planter was already 7 miles away, in Union hands, beyond Confederate reach. Ripley ordered the 3 white officers arrested: Captain Charles Relia, First Mate Samuel Chisholm, Engineer Samuel Pitcher. They were charged with dereliction of duty, court-martialed. The Confederacy needed someone to blame. But the real problem was not the officers. The real problem was the system. The Confederacy had built an entire military structure on the assumption that enslaved people were incapable of intelligent resistance. That assumption had just cost them a warship, military intelligence, and their credibility. The Confederate command tried to control the story. They issued statements. They claimed the officers had been negligent. They claimed the theft was an isolated incident. They claimed security would be tightened. But none of that changed the reality. A Confederate military vessel had been stolen from the most heavily defended harbor in the South by an enslaved man, without violence, without outside help, just intelligence, timing, and absolute confidence. And the Confederacy had handed him everything he needed to do it. They trained him, they trusted him, they gave him access, and then they left him alone. That was the mistake, not the officers going ashore, not the lack of guards. The mistake was underestimating the man at the helm. News of the theft spread quickly. Northern newspapers picked up the story within days. They called Robert Smalls a hero. They published illustrations of the planter flying the white flag. They wrote editorials about his intelligence and bravery. Abolitionists used the story as proof that enslaved people were not the helpless victims Confederate propaganda claimed them to be. Robert Smalls became famous, not because he wanted attention, but because what he had done was undeniable. He had beaten a military system, in the middle of a war, without help, just strategy. The story spread across the Union, across the Confederacy, across the world. And everywhere it went, people asked the same question. If one man could do this, what else was possible? The Confederacy tried to suppress the story in the South. They did not want enslaved people hearing about it. They did not want anyone thinking escape was achievable. But the story leaked anyway. Whispers spread through plantations, through docks, through slave quarters. The man who stole the warship, the man who sailed past the forts, the man who made it to freedom with his whole family. The details changed depending on who told it, but the core remained the same. Someone had done the impossible, and if it was possible once, maybe it could happen again. That fear, that uncertainty, that crack in the system's confidence was worth more than any single military victory, because it made the Confederacy question everyone, every pilot, every laborer, every enslaved person who worked near Confederate operations. If Robert Smalls could betray them, who else might? That paranoia, that loss of trust, was a wound the Confederacy never fully healed. Meanwhile, Congress passed a bill awarding prize money to Robert Smalls and his crew for capturing the planter. The ship was valued in the thousands. The weapons added more. Robert Smalls received $1,500. His crew split additional amounts. For men who had been enslaved months earlier, this was generational wealth. Money they could use to build new lives, to support families, to buy property. The Confederacy had spent years extracting labor from Robert Smalls without compensation. Now he was being paid for destroying them. The irony was not lost on anyone. The Union Navy gave Robert Smalls command of the planter, the same ship he had stolen. He was now officially a Union pilot. Later, he would be promoted to captain. That made Robert Smalls the first black captain in United States military history. He would go on to participate in 17 military engagements during the war. He would continue to provide intelligence. He would continue to navigate Union forces through hostile waters. And every single time, he would use the same strategic thinking that had gotten him out of Charleston Harbor. But all of that was still to come. Right now, in the immediate aftermath of the theft, the most important consequence was not what Robert Smalls gained. It was what the Confederacy lost. Charleston Harbor was compromised. The Union now had maps, codes, signal patterns, knowledge of which forts were understaffed, which batteries had limited ammunition, which waterways were safe. The Confederacy scrambled to change everything. New signals, new passwords, new defensive positions. But it was too late. The Union had already moved. Coles Island was taken. Other positions followed. The Confederacy was reacting, defending, trying to plug holes in a system that had been exposed, all because they had trusted the wrong person. Except it was not the wrong person. It was the right person in the wrong system. Robert Smalls was exactly as intelligent, as capable, as strategic as any Confederate officer. The Confederacy just never bothered to notice. They looked at him and saw his skin color. They stopped there. They never looked deeper. They never asked what he was capable of. They never considered that the man steering their ship might be steering it somewhere they did not want it to go. That blindness, that arrogance, that fundamental assumption of superiority was the real weapon Robert Smalls used. Not guns, not violence, just the Confederacy's own confidence turned against them. By the time the sun was fully up on May 13th, 1862, Charleston was in chaos. Orders were being rewritten. Security was being doubled. Officers were being questioned. The theft of the planter had exposed a vulnerability the Confederacy could not ignore. But changing the systems would take time. And in war, time was everything. The Union had already moved, already captured territory, already shifted their strategy based on the intelligence Robert Smalls provided. The Confederacy was behind, reacting, trying to recover, and they would stay behind for the rest of the war because the man they underestimated had just rewritten the rules. Robert Smalls stood on the deck of the USS Onward that morning and looked back toward Charleston, the city where he had been enslaved, the harbor where he had spent 3 years piloting Confederate ships, The forts that had let him pass because they never imagined he would use their trust against them. He had taken everything they taught him and turned it into a weapon. He had walked into their system, learned how it worked, and dismantled it from the inside. And the Confederacy never saw it coming, because they were too busy underestimating him. The war would continue for 3 more years. Battles would be fought. Lives would be lost. The outcome was still uncertain. But on May 13th, 1862, something fundamental shifted. The Confederacy learned that the people they enslaved were not loyal, were not passive, were not incapable. They learned that trust, once broken, could never fully be restored. They learned that every enslaved person working on Confederate military operations was now a potential threat. And they learned it because one man, one night, one operation, had proven that intelligence could defeat an entire system. Robert Smalls did not win the war that night, but he changed it. And the Confederacy would never recover from the humiliation of being beaten by the man they never thought to watch. The sun rose over Charleston Harbor. The planter was gone. The intelligence was compromised. The forts had been passed. The Union had gained ground. And somewhere in the Confederate command structure, someone was trying to figure out how this had happened. How an enslaved man had stolen a military vessel in the middle of the most defended harbor in the South. How he had sailed past 5 armed forts without anyone stopping him. How he had delivered that ship, those weapons, and all that intelligence directly to the enemy. The answer was simple. They underestimated him. They assumed he could not. They assumed he would not. They assumed he was too afraid, too uneducated, too powerless to ever turn their own weapons against them. And that assumption, that arrogance, that blindness, was the only mistake that mattered. Because by the time they realized what Robert Smalls was capable of, he was already gone. The ship was already in Union hands. The war had already changed, and there was nothing they could do to take it back.
Oh wow, that was an abrupt ending, but man, that was interesting to say the least. You know, I just do not recall
Vessel in the
a
middle of a war
historical
had just taken that.
circumstance of this particular gentleman, but obviously, yes, he was out there and he made miraculous this miraculous act happen and became the captain of a Union ship in the aftermath. So magnificent. Just think, I think this is probably one that J. Edgar Hoover held into, you know, his held to him closely because he wanted to. He did surveillance on anybody who he thought could possibly do anything against the setup that was in place. So I'm pretty sure he was familiar with this story, and he did not uh, let that guard down when it came to his term in the FBI. So, but yeah, a lot of good information in this video, a lot of good historical context, and Robert Smalls, yeah, took a whole ship and even presented himself as an actual captain and was able to uh, get all the way through without having to so much as lift his hand, you know. And I was just thinking when they were going over those details, how the Most High had to been, you know, right
Con,
there. You know what I'm saying?
con.
Like had to have been right there, just letting that ship go through, and you know, just get all the way through to the end. That last one, you know, that last one, that's the one that probably has you the most nervous. And if we make it through here, but if we get stopped, oh, it's gonna be terrible. So, beautiful, magnificent story, man. That was good stuff. But I'm gonna go ahead and yield there. Go ahead, Aki.
I was thinking the same thing. You know, the Most High was definitely, I would say, a part of this mission.
Yeah.
Him escaping, and
Mhm.
that shouldn't sound foreign to a believer. It
Right.
shouldn't sound funny to us as believers. We read in the scriptures of Peter being led out of captive out of the prison by an angel.
Yeah. Right.
Uh, we hear about Shaul there being an earthquake and Shaul being released. Well, he could have left, I believe. I believe he
Yeah.
could have left,
He did.
but he didn't.
Yeah.
So, these miracles still occur today.
Mm.
We if we look back over our lives, our own very own lives,
Right.
we can think of different times that something extraordinary occurred. You
Mhm.
know,
Indeed.
and I think this was definitely one of those type of situations. I think about the uh, the brother must have been ice cold, because if you're caught, it's death.
He did.
It's death. So not only was he probably ice cold, he was probably had some backup plans. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, well, if this happens, I'm gonna shoot him. But
Right.
you have to be full of confidence
Yeah.
to feel like you can pull this off. You
Right.
know, and that's a peace and a feeling that comes from the Most High. I'll yield there.
Indeed. I was thinking, if he, let's say that first or that second gate, he gets stopped, and even to try to get through, you know what I'm saying? Like you say you get through the first one, and then the second one, they like, no, no, pull over, let's check it out. And if that happens, you really can't turn back. You really can't go forward. So that was a daring circumstance, and our praises to the Most High. It worked, got him through it, and then even him pulling up with that sheet, flying that sheet and waving that flag, that white flag, that was brilliant as well. That it was just so many positive uh, uh, favors working for him, in that situation, and it just worked out. Like one wrong move, one of those things go wrong, whole different situation. But all praise to the Most High. We're gonna go ahead and wrap this on up. Hope you have enjoyed this video. It was rather very interesting, very interesting. I don't think I was familiar with this story, but we do this for a specific purpose. Romans chapter 10 and verse 1, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to Abba for Israel is that they might be saved. We want to see our people saved. We want to see our people set free. We want to see our people restored to the prominence that the Most High have promised for us. How are we going to do it? First of all, we're going to keep the faith and the belief in Hamashiach to come and do the work that the Most High have said that he would do. And also Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear the Most High and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. It is so very important to understand that in the conclusion of the whole matter, we are to fear the Most High and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. And at the end of the day, when it is all said and done, all the dust is settled and all the smoke has cleared, we will be judged, or rather, we have feared the Most High and kept his commandments. Why? Because this is the whole duty of man. I am your Akazaki Yahoo, joined as always by my most esteemed Akinanaya, giving all praises, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahweh, Bashem, Hamashiach, Wamalak, Yahweh Shah, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who were scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say shalom, wa baruchim, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait to the day when the Most High brings us back together and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation under the Most High power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone. with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. Until that day comes, shalom, family.
Shalom, shalom, Mr. Picard.
All praises to the Most High. Praise you, Abba Yah, Kwam Yasha Allah,
Kwam Yashala.
and Barak Hashem Yahweh. Hallelujah.